On Teams, so we'll make sure that we respect the I think we're going to go on the minute. I'm going back onto our agenda. The next item on the agenda is our discussion of the budget. I'll turn it over to Dan to introduce that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chair Cross. First of all, just confirming we're off of mute. You heard online. I really want to check at some point which commissioners have been online. Screen. Oh. Pause here while we make sure our technology operating. Okay, I see Commissioner Adams and check the. Why don't you just take a peek at the roster to see if we have other commissioners in attendance. Commissioners, this is an action item. This is one of the more significant responsibilities of the commissions on a biannual basis to approve an agency request budget that the staff will finalize and submit to the Administrative Services by September 1st. And as many commissioners know, but because there are so many folks here, this is a building block in the process of developing the state's biennial budget for higher education workforce, virtually all of which comes through the HECC and is adopted by the legislature and the governor towards the end of the legislative session. So we're working on a document that will, upon the commission submission, or approval, be submitted to the Department of Administrative Services, which will then compile it along with the budget requests of dozens of other state agencies, and will hand those off to the incoming governor after the election. And the governor and her team will determine what recommendations to make to the legislature for a statewide budget for the biennium that comes up, that begins July 1st, 2023. And the legislature at that point, starting in February of next year, will hold committee meetings and ultimately adopt through both chambers various agency budgets, including the Higher Education Coordinating Commissions. That process is nearly a year away from concluding, right? That we expect that legislatively adopted budget to be finished in June, or it could even be later than that next year. And what you are doing today represents the first kind of formal step in that development process. But to be clear, there are a lot of steps still to go. I've indicated some of them, and I think it's useful to understand your role today as representing a moment in time on the part of the commission and a contribution to an ongoing dialogue with our partners, with the incoming governor and legislature. And it won't be the last time that you necessarily sort of weigh in. Staff and potentially some of you will participate in the legislative session presenting, typically with the governor's staff, the governor's request budget for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and for our partners. We'll have other conversations with legislators and legislative staff when that process is underway. And of course, that will all occur at a different moment, at a later moment in time, when more is known about the state's overall budget picture, and we are working in concert with other folks, including other agencies, and helping craft an overall state budget. So in some ways, I want to both emphasize that this is really important. You are setting a marker, you're setting priorities from the commission standpoint about investments in higher education and workforce training. And you are also, we're very early in the process. There's a lot still to come, and a lot of changes, and potentially even changes in the commission's priorities between now and final adoption of a legislative budget. The other thing I want to say before turning it over to Ramona to walk through the staff recommendation on the agency request budget is just provide a little bit of context and historical background for higher education funding in Oregon. And we've shared with you, I believe by email within the last month, some highlights from the annual report that the state higher education executive officers produce about state funding trends in state funding for higher education. You know, this document allows state by state comparisons, which are interesting. It also allows historical comparisons, which I think are interesting and revealing. And there were a few key findings from this year's report on state investment in higher education that I wanted to emphasize and that we've pulled out of the report. The first is that enrollment in Oregon's public higher education institutions has declined and is declining at a faster than average level. And over the last 1, 5, and 10 years, enrollment declines in Oregon institutions overall have been 2 to 3 times steeper than the national average. That creates certainly stress for institutions that count on enrollment to help sustain and balance budget. It also jeopardizes this commission's progress towards meeting this commission's goals. And we've talked about that in the past, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. At the same time, Oregon's public investment in higher education has grown at rates over the last decade faster than almost any other state in the country. So overall investment by the state of Oregon in higher education has grown 94% over the last 10 years in total funding levels, and only California has exceeded that state funding increase over the last decade. That said, that sounds like good news, and it is, but we still lag the national averages. So we are still a comparatively low funding state. We're not the lowest in the country or second lowest in the country as we were 10 years ago on a per capita or per student basis, but neither are we average. We're kind of in between the two. We rank in the mid 30s on most of those kind of per indexed per student or per capita measures. Just a couple of other, or I think one more point to make about trends and comparisons when it comes to Oregon's budgeting for higher education. And that is that our state investment in financial aid direct to support to students lags national averages by even more than other types of higher education spending. So we're nearly 40% below the national average in terms of state investment in direct grant aid to students. So we are very close to the bottom on that, in particular in comparison with neighboring West Coast states. California more than doubles our level, or about doubles our level of funding per student in direct grant aid. Washington is spending nearly 4 times as much in direct grant aid per student. And we've talked about that in some of our budget meetings with some of the commissioners, particularly those who have served on our funding and achievement subcommittee in the last several months of preparing for this staff recommendation. So we'll have, we've got some time this afternoon to discuss. Ramona will walk through the highlights and answer your questions and really engage the commission in discussion about this action. Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ramona Rodemaker. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of HECC. I'm here today to give you an overview of kind of where we've been budgetarily and where it is we are to go. And so the good news is we are nearing the completion of the agency request budget process. If you choose to look at it like this, we're about to graduate from one phase to the next. And I wanted to thank you guys for hanging in there with us as we have talked through policy option packages, stakeholder input, and just some of the budget realities that we're facing as we put this document together. The good news, like I said, is that we're graduating from agency request to governor's recommended budget, and that will be the next conversation that we have. And if Guthrie wants to go to the next slide, The bad news is we're going to talk about the budget for the next 2 hours. If you have questions, please let me know. If I lapse into budgetese and I'm not making any sense, stop me and I will go backwards. But essentially, you know, I'm just going to walk us through it, and this is a conversation as opposed to me talking at you. So please let me know if there's anything I could do to make that easier. And if you want to go to the next slide. When we ordinarily do state budgeting, it follows a fairly predictable path. And that path is that you usually get what you got, and they add inflation to it. And so usually you see some pretty predictable numbers and patterns. That is not the case this particular go around. We have in Oregon and in the nation been on a wild ride through the pandemic, not sort of knowing, you know, whether we were going to be in a cutting scenario or an adding scenario. And we have been adjusting throughout this entire process. So when you look at the numbers that are in the chart that's up there, you're going to see some pretty wild swings. And I'll walk you through those just to kind of let you know what's included in that. But they are all explainable. We started out at the beginning of this biennium getting a legislatively adopted budget of $3.58 billion. A lot has happened since then. In fact, we've had a 10.1% increase in our budget since that time period two years ago. We have increased the budget by $360 million, and a lot of that has been through some really historically important things that have happened. We have the Oregon Tribal Student Grant that came into our budget. We have Future Ready Oregon. A lot of positive things happening in the budget. The good news, bad news again for that is we've made progress. A lot of that, the bad news is that a lot of that was one-time spending, that now through this process, we need to go back to the legislature and re-request that we continue on the path that we're on and that we continue to make progress in these areas. So if you want to go to the next slide. So the budget swings that I'm talking about, they're due to some mechanical issues with the budget. First of all, when you're looking at the $360 million that we've gained, that happens in emergency boards. It happens in the short session. It can occur just basically, you know, through special sessions, things like that. And if you kind of walk where we've been for the past couple of years, we started out this biennium thinking we were going to have to take some really dramatic cuts. And in fact, we went to the legislature and they did cut our budget. Then they later added it back. As we were trying to figure out what the pandemic trends would be, we were adjusting all along. And so with the addition of the federal money, we were fortunate to get some one-time investments that occurred. And I talked about those already. The other thing that happens on a routine basis with budgets is things phase out. So when you were looking at the numbers a minute ago, you saw some big increases in where we are at now, and then you're going to see some large decreases. Things are what we call in budget land phasing out. That means that either we need to go back and re-request funds. That happens for a couple of really understandable and regular occurrences. We always have to go back and re-request bond funds. So you see $500 million falling out of our budget. it will come back. It's just going to come back at a later stage in the budget development. You see limited duration positions falling off. We will again have there, and that's because they are intended to be limited. So we have to go back and ask for that if the programs that we're running continue to need those staff. That's a pretty big one, this particular budget, just because of our Future Ready Oregon. We got about 26 staff to run a $200 million, job training and employment program that that is funded by some general fund, but predominantly federal fund. So that means that it falls off of our budget. We go back and we request, and you're going to see it in a pop here later on in the discussion. Other things that impact our budget, and you see some pretty big swings. And when I'm saying big swings, I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars. They're things like debt service just compounds in our budget. We're paying for the cost of money for all of the past decisions that we've made, for projects that we're continuing to fund. Our current projects that are ongoing right now, particularly capital improvement projects. And then you also see the new requests that we always have to factor in cost of issuance. And so it looks like the cost of those projects are higher than the money we actually get to run them. That's true. That's just one of the costs of doing the type of business that we do at HECC. Other things that change and make the budget look a little strange that are also very explainable are just programmatic and organizational changes. For example, I think we've got a couple of changes in this particular budget where at one point we transferred some money to ODE. They ran a program. We've decided to do it in-house this time. And so it won't be any different for those people who are receiving services, but it looks different in the budget. Also, you see some changes with Future Ready Oregon. I think we parked almost all of our positions last time in Office of Workforce Investments. We're spreading those out this time. And so it looks like changes. It's not really a change that's going to impact very much. And then lastly, we get to the part of the budget that you probably care about the most, and honestly that everyone cares about the most. And that is the policy option packages. These are the ad packages. What new ideas, what new programs, what ideas do we have to improve services, to provide better service, to fund programs that matter? And that is really going to be the bulk of what I'll talk about today, are going to be those policy option packages. So if you want to go to the next one. That's the same slide. So you don't have to think, how did it change? It didn't. So I'm going to walk you through just kind of some of the big swings here, and I'm going to do it on a really high level, just so you know where the money's coming and going. And so this is kind of the base we'll work from moving forward. Yeah.
So can you verify that the headings should be 23, 25 section? That's not that. Those are actually.
Yes, the headings should be 23, 25. So yeah. So I did this late last night. Sorry.
I don't think we have this to get through. Do we have this?
No.
And we'll send it out afterwards. Okay. So yeah, and I'm just going to walk through line by line and tell you in really broad strokes what's happening in each part of the department. In the director's office, you see about $13 million between legislatively approved budget, where we're at today, and CSL. CSL, if you recall, is usually just the amount of resource to continue doing what you're doing now, current service level. And what's phasing out in the director's office is $13 million in part-time faculty health benefits. We know that Representative McLean will be working to add those back into the budget. So we don't expect it to disappear on a permanent basis, but it does disappear at this stage in the budget. The next thing you see when you move to the policy object going going right across the thing is you see about $100 million being added to the director's office. That is the equity package. And that's just kind of where it's parked right now. And it may move as we move forward in this process. It probably should move, but that's where we have it right now, namely because that $100 million is going to be the result of a lot of work finding out what the legislative group working on underrepresented student success wants to have happen with that. So right now, that's what you see there is one of our larger equity policy option packages moving into the director's office. In operations, there's really only one thing happening across the entire line. Essentially, it is some changes happening with our IT modernization project. And what is happening is those are funded by Q bonds. And all bond funds go out of the budget and we have to re-request them. And so you see about $5 million disappearing. We're going to go back. We're going to ask for limitation to get that $5 million back and be able to spend it. And the $5 million added to it is the rest of the money to complete that project. In R&D, those are a couple of staffing changes that occurred. The state longitudinal data system staff were at one point last biennium removed from the budget. They were added back during this biennium, and then we are asking for 6 additional staff in a policy option package. So that is entirely about capacity to do reporting and to be able to report out on what is happening with the programs and the institutions and with Future Ready Oregon and with all the different things that are happening in the agency. In academic policy and authorization, you see $5 million in gear funding going away. That's $5 million we got, which is the governor's emergency education relief fund. And it came in to be able to do some projects to support pandemic recovery, but it was always known to be one-time money. And then you see a couple of policy option packages happening there. Again, mostly staff for private career school compliance staffing, and also rural student policy advisor being added in. And this is just me trying to answer the demand, show me the money. I'm trying to tell you where stuff is all I'm doing right now. In community colleges and workforce development, you see that number going down quite a bit. They also had some gear funding, which was the pandemic relief money the governor got. About $5 million of that's going away. They also received through Future Ready Oregon some credit for prior learning money that is not going to be renewed or moved forward. And then some other smaller things, but all very routine stuff that we expected to have happen. When you get to Office of Workforce Investment, that is entirely Future Ready Oregon, and it's due to what types of funds it is. And so you have 149 million phasing out, and then we are going to re-request that limitation in our policy option to be able to continue to do those programs and receive the federal funds that we have always intended to do the last half of that program with. We're going to get it through the Department of Administrative Services, so it's going to look like other funds, but it is essentially that federal money to be able to continue to roll out Future Ready Oregon. In OSAC, Oregon Student Access and Completion, that's the tribal student grant phasing out. And so that is one of our highest priorities, if not the highest priority, to get added back through policy option packages. And then you see that amount of money just jump in a huge amount. That's going to be again, reflective of our budget values. And you're going to see us asking for a lot of direct financial aid to students for a variety of reasons. It's predominantly going to be an expansion of our Oregon Opportunity Grant and Oregon Promise program. And also, just by very nature of what that program is, it is also an equity-focused policy option package. And then we get to the big money, the post-secondary finance and capital. That again looks like just something's going on there. What the heck happened? That's bond funding disappearing. It's going to come back. And we'll talk about the capital projects prioritized list here in a little while. But you know, we don't know in exactly what the numbers will be when that bond funding returns. But historically, we know we will get some support to continue that work. And when you get to policy option packages, institutional policy option packages are always some of our biggest ones. And you see mostly you see there some changes in the support fund amounts that are being requested, and also just all of the institutional POPs that we'll talk about in a minute. One of the things before we leave this slide is just, I just want to remind you guys, when you look at where the money is, when you think of the HECC budget, and then you think of the agency, the HECC, the agency is 3% of this budget. The big money is in the money that's going out to other people, to the institutions, the colleges, the universities, to local workforce development boards, to students who are receiving those grant payments. One of the main functions that we provide is that we administrate these funds, and we make sure that we get them to the people who need them, who are serving the local communities and people out there who need service. So I just, before we leave there, wanted to let you guys know. The other thing I'm going to point you to is just the numbers in the bottom. And at this point, like Ben said, we're at a point in the process, so I wouldn't get too attached to those numbers, but it kind of tells you how big our requests are. When you look at, like I said, we started out at 3.58, our legislatively adopted budget. If you look at where we're trying to go in the next biennium from where we started, that's a 48.1% increase, or almost, we want almost half of our budget again in order to continue to do work. Or if you look at it from where we're at now, and again, we've had $360 million added, that's still growing the budget by almost a quarter, or 25.1%. And above just inflation, this is a 37% increase. So we do not expect to get everything we're asking for. So in many ways, we are just laying out, here's the menu of things we would like you to invest in and support. And we are giving you a rough idea of what our priorities are, what your priorities are actually. And that's what this conversation is about. But we know that there are never enough resources out there to fully fund every agency's full agency request budget. So next slide. So what drives our budget? Our cost drivers. Our cost drivers, beyond the things I already talked to you about, which are more mechanical in nature, are really the priorities that you set. You see in that diagram up there that student and job seeker support is a huge driver for the agency. That is including the grants, the scholarships, the job training, all the direct assistance we provide to individuals. Capital investment is another cost driver in this budget. It just making sure that we're supporting the infrastructure that institutions depend on. Equity and access, that that is not only important, as we've talked about in the past, in our process in making sure that we are talking to the stakeholders that are most impacted about how these ideas will impact them, but also making sure that we're making a difference in the outcomes that we receive. So, and then affordability. 1 in 2 students in Oregon cannot afford their education and struggles to make ends meet. And we try and make a difference with that. So a lot beyond the mechanics, what drives our budget and what should be driving our budget are the policy decisions that you guys make. And you'll also see about 10 policy option packages coming up here that are going to be in the category of operational support. Some of those are housekeeping, some of those are just the personnel to be able to do the things that need to be done to support these policy option packages as well. So next, I'm going to go through the list of what's on our policy option packages pretty quickly, and then I'll go deeper into and highlight some specific ones. This first list is the entire list of our financial aid and affordability policy option packages. And the first one is the Oregon Tribal Student Grant. And we are requesting $40.25 million in general fund. That amount may change based on how many people actually become eligible for the program. Right now, I think we're approaching 400 people who we have found have valid applications for this program. We had predicted somewhere around 700, and so that this number may come down as we go forward. But it's vital that we get this particular package renewed, or else we're going to basically be leaving a lot of those 400 people hanging. We're paying cost of attendance for them in this first year, up to cost of attendance. And then they could be in a place where if we can't figure out how to get this renewed, that assistance just falls off to zero, or they need to kind of rebuild the portfolio resources that's going to pay for it. So that one becomes very important for those folks that we get it renewed. The next one is by far our largest policy option package, and also a very important one for the agency. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but you see us in this policy option package increasing the amount of resource we're putting into the Oregon Opportunity Grant, our largest need-based program, grant program, by about 4-fold. And we're almost doubling the resources we're asking for Oregon Promise. We know that that entire request may be unrealistic given the resources that are available, but that is a scalable request. And so we can provide additional services based on whatever number we actually get, and adjust our way of providing those grants once we have more solid information. Next is the Aspire and FAFSA program. That's Aspire is a college readiness program that is internal to the agency. We are looking to grow that program and also extend the outreach that we do to make sure that students and prospective students are completing that financial aid form so that they can get the aid they're entitled to. Next one, student child care grants. That's a request for $4.2 million of general fund. And the reason for this one is we're not able to serve all of the people who apply and are eligible to receive that. These are the post-secondary students who have children of their own and need to be able to have those children be in childcare while they're attending school or studying or whatever. And this increases the amount of resources for that program, again, by almost fourfold. Right now, we serve about 80 students in this category. This amount of money would get us up closer to the 400 or 500 level, depending on what they actually qualified for. And then lastly, on the financial aid and affordability list is a continuation of the Oregon National Guard education grants and an expansion of the Oregon National Guard grants. So the continuation is we have a lot of troops who have been demobilized overseas and are returning and are trying to access that program. It is, in fact, for them an entitlement program. If they qualify for it, they get it. And so we need the money to be able to provide that to them. The other part of this is the Oregon Military Department is introducing their own policy option package where they're seeking to expand who is eligible to receive these dollars. And they want to increase that to spouses and dependents of eligible service members. Next, I'm going to move to institutional support. And this is kind of the 200 level series of what we're asking for. The first one I talked about already is $100 million for student equity and to be responsive to what we've heard at the underrepresented student success meetings we've been attending with legislators across the state. And we don't have a lot of details about that yet. It's really kind of a placeholder at this point, but we have the committees that are beginning to meet, and that we'll start filling in the blanks on this very soon. Next one is the open educational resources. We have had this in our budget, I think, almost every biennium since HECC's been around. We just have funded them on a grant basis. And so we know this is a good program and that it serves students and it helps them receive supplies and books and things like that at no cost to them, open educational resources. We're just seeking at this point to make it a baseline budget item as opposed to having their funding be subject to grant availability. So this is making permanent something that we have been doing for a long time. And they have in this last biennium really expanded their efforts so that they have been doing more materials translated into various languages and things like that. So they are continuing to grow in that. This is seeking to support that work. Next one is a $20 million request to continue the Strong Start program. Strong Start, I believe, began in 2021. It was billed as a summer bridge program to be able to provide wraparound services and supports to incoming and returning students who needed supports after being off during the pandemic. And it has, I think the various institutions have been having success with this program, and this is a request to continue it and expand it into the future. Next is a cybersecurity package. It is requesting $33.8 million in general fund. It would be serving universities and colleges. This one actually provides for an issue that the institutions do not have ongoing resources to address. Educational institutions are one of the #1 targets for hackers and people who are trying to break into systems. And this would provide some staff, some technology, and some software that would help stop those intrusions into the system. It is designed to fund both community colleges and public universities through this package. Next is targeted state program funding. This is really, it's the part of the budget that in many respects funds kind of some discrete projects that are ongoing, but also things like extension, agricultural experiment station, forest research lab. Two projects, this is merely carry forward money for. They did not complete the project in the time period that the budget was anticipating. And so it's just carrying it forward. And the rest of it is much in the way that we look at providing operational support for universities and community colleges. This, I think, also provides some of the operational supports for some of these projects that are ongoing as well. Next, we get into some of the larger packages in this particular area. The Public University Support Fund, and I'll talk about this in more detail in a little while, as well as the Community College Support Fund. The intent behind these is to provide, I talked about at the first slide, continuing service level. Continuing service level is a state term that basically gives you inflation to be able to continue doing what you've been doing. So the intent is not to add any functionality or outcomes or people you serve. It's just, the additional money you need to pay for your expenses. The support funds are like that in that, except that the calculation for what's required, the state service level often doesn't cover it. And so we do a different calculation to really make that same determination about what is the amount of funding that will allow you to continue to provide the same service level that you are now, and we usually enter policy option packages to try and get current service level up to that area. So this is really not additive. It's just sustaining what it is that people are already doing. And then you get to capital projects. Jim Pinkard was here last time. He did a pretty long presentation on the capital project rubrics and all that. I don't think much has changed since then, so I'm not going to go very deep into that. But essentially, we provide a prioritized list to the legislature, and they have a certain amount of bond funds available. They then get to look at our list and kind of draw a line in it about what amount of resource they have and what they're going to be able to fund. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they start moving things around and then they draw the line, but that's really their prerogative. So anyway, that right now we present in the budget the entire list. We don't in any way anticipate that entire list will be funded, but that's the numbers you're seeing there on that particular slide. Next, I'm going to move to career development and support. And you tend to think from the name of this that this is predominantly Oregon Workforce Investments. It's not. We have career development and support happening throughout the agency. We have packages in this particular list that are in Office of Workforce Investments, Community College Workforce Development, OSAC, and on a high level, Oregon Youth Works is, we received $10 million in OE to do the Oregon Conservation Corps and try to mitigate wildfire issues. And that was one-time money. We're seeking to get that $10 million for continuing the program and also doing the job training for youth up to age 24. And then also that adds $2 million to also do some specific outreach to the tribes and to make sure that we are working with the community-based organizations within the tribes to make sure that their youth are served at least as well. Next, early learning educator grants. These are some grant funds that would go for early learning professionals who are seeking degrees in mental health and behavioral health, and also early childhood education. And they're grants, so they'd be administered through HECC. Next is the Career Information System. This is a system that we want to provide some ongoing support to, that is run out of, I believe, the University of Oregon. And by doing that, it would allow people to have statewide access to this system, and also help grow our credentials that way. Credentials of value. I was like, credentials that matter. That's not right. Credentials of value program, and so this is professional services dollars that would be transferred to them for that purpose. Next is $4.2 million request for education incentive grants to AmeriCorps members. AmeriCorps is part of our agency, and through the Oregon Serves unit within OE, and this would give them in-state tuition and rates, and also match the federal education incentives that they get through the AmeriCorps program, up to, I think, $3,500 per person. Next slide. Now we get into operational support, and I'm almost done. So, so with the list, the first one is we know this project by many names. We have called it FAMIS. We have called it modernization. We are now calling it Student and Job Seeker Enterprise IT System. This is a couple of components, but it's basically the IT system for the department. One of the main things that it started out that we were trying to replace was our financial aid and management information system. We have also added to that we're trying to add a module for our private career school VETS program, and also eligible provider training list for OE, which is a requirement federally that we do that. These are the intent is to get all of our data in one place so that we can all access and use it. These first three programs are a beginning. We expect to add things to it. But right now, what is driving this for the legislature, and also driving the first phase of this program, is definitely getting the FAMIS system up and running, and having a better resource for students who are trying to find out information about what they may be eligible for in terms of financial aid. Next one, comprehensive data and reporting. This is a request for additional staffing in our R&D unit, and it is, like I said earlier, really focused on increasing our reporting capacity and trying to make sure that all of the information that we collect from folks gets translated into information that people can use. It also has a big push in it right now because of the Future Ready Oregon stuff, and the fact that we're trying to get that job seeker information in there as well. Next, transfer portal. This is a continuing effort. We are continuing to work on our MTMs and common course numbering and all this. We, at this point, have this in here predominantly as a placeholder. It will eventually be an IT project. In terms of having a system that students can go into and figure out how things translate through different institutions. At this point, we do not believe that we will get that IT project completed in the next biennium, but we need to figure out kind of what our next step is and what we do. And so we, again, expect that number to change and the specifics to be developed as we continue on. Next, this is a request for someone to serve as a rural student policy person. In our kind of common definitions of underrepresented, we frequently put rural citizens into that category, and this is an attempt to really have somebody try and figure out what is different, what or unique that we ought to be doing just to serve this population better. Next, Future Ready Oregon. This, as I referenced before, is re-asking for the money that we got in short session. So this is us asking for the federal money. This is effectively, effectively limitation that will allow DAS to transfer that money to us. But it's not new per se. It's continuing to do what that program is committed to. 407, package 407 is basically some staff support. One is a training and development position for the agency, and the other is a second internal auditor. As the amount of money and the number of programs we receive continues to increase, our risk increases. And having one auditor in many ways limits our ability to do that work in-house, because the protocols in auditing require them to check each other's work. And so we are often still relying on other agencies to lend us their staff. Almost the rest of these are all pretty small. We've got some reclassifications happening. That's kind of getting people classified at the area at which we're already paying them. So it's not an additional limitation issue. It's moving the dollars around to get them where they belong issue in reclassifications. We are in fact in this package not adding any new staff. We are subtracting one. So it's right sizing our personnel budget is what this package is. Next one is one position looking at private career school compliance, and that would enable us to go out and do site visits at the private career schools to make sure that everything they're reporting it does in fact appear to be the case. And also just going out and having the ability to ask more questions and see what's going on. 410 is the AmeriCorps what is 410? This one is, I think it's a couple of positions.
It's 2 positions, yes.
Okay, 2 positions in Oregon Serves, and what you're seeing there is the fact that in order to draw down federal funds, we need to be able to contribute some state funds. And so again, I believe these folks may even already be here. This is just a matter of being able to draw down the federal funds so that we can continue to pay them. Access to transcripts. This is exploring this topic. We've had that conversation a couple of times with you guys, and this is adding a staff person to be able to go out and have the conversations and see what that might actually look like in Oregon. And it's not only access to transcripts, but I think we're also envisioning that including the automatic, not enrollment, but admissions and how those programs might work. So, we had two packages at one point. We've condensed it into one because these really are, we need to go have some exploratory conversations. Yes.
When you're finished with this slide, let's pause and see if there's questions or.
Sure.
What was that?
I'm done.
Okay.
So,
Well, lots of information, so, and I wanted to make sure that if there's any questions on any. Yes, please.
I think I might have missed the vote early on. I hope it didn't. I hope I didn't create too many gaps. But I think you used the word limitation very good.
what word?
Limitation.
Oh, okay. Limitation in state budgeting is permission to spend. And so it's not actual money. It is basically saying it usually applies to I don't know. I mean, it's certain fund types that you get, and you may actually be able to draw down the funds, but until you have that conversation or put it into your budget, you're not allowed to spend them. And so when I said limitation, I was talking about our IT modernization project. And what I was referencing is that we received this biennium $5 million to do that project. And that's bond funds. The bond funds are not in question. They exist. What happens is our limitation and ability to spend them goes away, and we have to re-request that so that the funds can carry forward into the next budget.
So you're looking for the authority to spend the money.
Yeah.
That's all we do. Great.
All right.
Anybody else? For those of you who are new, I would also say that this has been, each of these have been discussed in a significant amount of time, and so through conversation, and I'll call on Vice Chair to see if there's anything. Mr. Lowe chairs the committee that's been working on that.
No, and it's good to see it again in both comprehensive and fully understandable. So thank you and your staff very much for pulling this together. I think what I would add or emphasize is that to this point, and with the discussion of the FNA committee, you go all the way back to the student direct support to students. That's there. These items, obviously, the Oregon Opportunity Grant, Oregon Promise, are the biggest new thing, huge number at this stage. And recognizing that this, at this point, is, as has been said, a piece of paper and just a step in the process. I also want to make sure that as a commission, we are united in realizing sort of the substance of our principle that we are putting into this budget. And what the FNA committee said, individually, this wasn't a formal vote, but the consensus I think we came to is that the first two items here are in rank order that we absolutely have to follow. We have to have legislative approval to continue the Oregon Travel Grant, that student grant. That is sort of the most important priority. It's been announced. It is an incredibly good starting program. It is fairly rare in the United States. It is a program in which we can and should take great pride if we are able to get this funding and administer this in the way that we should. There's no reason. So I'm sort of taking that one as a given. The huge increase in the Oregon Opportunity Grant and Oregon Promise, I think, is a statement of philosophy. And I think even at this stage, it's very important as stakeholders come to us, as we heard this morning, with their requests or requests for even more, which are understandable and needed and necessary, that we be clear-eyed in our vision or our ranking. Now, again, the governor may have a completely different set of priorities and may run a train into it. But just, I think it really speaks emotionally to me as well. And I know does to some of you, the fact that we are willing to say, these are our priorities. This is where we're putting our big push. So I guess I just wanted to make that as a statement, invite discussion or disagreement. And also at the end, once we hear from commissioners, I might also ask Ramona and Ben for you to be thinking about, as I'm sure you already are, what we can do as an agency almost from the day a new governor is elected, because it's the kind of huge request that if somebody gets wind of it or it's put in front of them even before a formal presentation, that you can kind of either think of it positively or think of it negatively, and that can cover everything that follows. Last, I'd like you to speak to that, but also the last point, the last question I have is you were talking early in the intro about our comparison to California and Washington, and that Washington direct student aid is 4 times California, almost double. So if we got, I guess I want to see where this would put us, or a number close to this would put us compared to our project. That's sort of 3 different things, but anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I'm happy to just jump on the comments. In terms of our comparative ranking, and we can sort of follow up on this and get it and make it more precise, but this level of investment in state grants to students, state financial aid, would close the gap or nearly close the gap with the state of Washington. States per capita student financial aid. I don't know if it would get us all the way there, but it would get us most of the way. I mean, this would represent state financial aid spending, and that's consistent with what we can describe would be necessary for some surpass. And just to be clear, and we can go into greater detail on this if you wish, but at this level of investment, what we're talking about is that targeted students at ending colleges and universities would receive in up to middle income students, state sort of average family income students would be receiving state grants, not just the very lowest. And the lowest income students would receive grants that are equal to the cost of tuition of institutions. So this would be a much different program than today's currently limited $3,600 only the lowest income students to attend. Several times more generous and would expand many students. So that's that in a nutshell. In terms of the question of socializing this, especially a proposal like this with incoming governor and legislature, there are a lot of steps to that. We can't do it alone. We're in the middle of a campaign season. Of course, the HECC is a state agency doesn't operate in a political manner, right?
So there are disconnected everything.
Okay, I think we're reconnected. So there are limits on what we can do at this point in terms of engagement in campaigns, but with partners. I mean, part of what meetings like this are about and budget proposals like this are about creating a set of ideas that can help to galvanize and even sort of coordinate partners in their work to connect with candidates, to connect with currently elected officials, and others. And this will not be the only higher education affordability related proposal out there. We even, in the last couple of days, have bounced ideas back and forth with other partners who are thinking about other ways in which it's similar, but maybe slightly different ways in which big increases in state financial aid could help to support students. And I just expect that over the coming months and then post-election, there will be those conversations. We'll be trying to, at least present some ideas that can be introduced into that. And then when we do have a governor, we will have the opportunity to work with probably their staff at some point between the election and the beginning of the legislative session to present some of these concepts to them. I don't think that's a great answer, and we can talk offline a little bit more about how the HECC can more be effective in this period of transition. I should mention, there are a couple of other entities that I think could be very important in this work, and especially in a transition year politically. One of them is the Governor's Racial Justice Council, with whom we've been meeting for a couple of years, that it's been created and that will be sustained under law and in effect handed off to the incoming governor, and could play an important role in advising the incoming governor on budget priorities. And the other, of course, is the Legislative Task Force on Underrepresented Student Success, a set of legislators, many of whom will be returning next session, and we hope will be carrying with them this interim work that they've done and a set of recommendations, some of which I hope will be aligned with what you're adopting here for investments in higher education and workforce training. I certainly think that big new investments in student affordability through grant aid will be on their set of recommendations. So those, besides the governor, besides the elected officials, we have these entities along with the HECC who will help span the transition and advise, influence the incoming legislature.
Commissioner Cross, and during the break, Amy Cox and I were discussing just I spent 16 years in private higher ed, and one of the things we worked very hard to do to communicate with students was not the gross cost of their education, but the net cost of their education. And I think one of the data points that would be helpful to get support for this kind of investment in financial aid is to be able to talk about the impact that this will have on average real net costs that the student experiences going to one of our colleges or universities. I know we can calculate that, and I think, I think when you bring it down to say, what does this really mean to a student who goes to one of our schools? And then on top of that, the fact that net cost impact is weighted strongly in favor of students who are least able to pay. I just think it's really important as we talk about this isn't just investment in financial aid. This is how it will actually impact the student.
Commissioner Lujan Valerios has a question.
Thank you, Chair Cross. I do want to add to some of the sentiments that some of the other commissioners have said, but I do want to add an additional layer to it. I've been in spaces where I've advocated on student side as being as a student and as a professional staff at OSA. And I've been in spaces where we've had to advocate outside of those specific spaces that are student centric, and still in trying to sustain our higher education system. And there's a lot of disagreements between advocacy bodies on the student side, on administrative sides, whether it's tuition, whether it's specific policy changes within institutions. But the one constant that's very true is that we always show up in unity about asking for the highest dollar possible at the state legislature, whether that's through the Opportunity Grant, the Promise Grant, the Public University Fund, or the Community College Fund. And I really appreciate the framing of the conversation and saying, like, this is the starting point. This is where we're going to begin the conversation. And I think it's important for us to realize then that it's upon us then to really, it's incumbent on us to then put that kind of starting line at a pretty high pace. We know that we're going to be negotiated down, right? We know that whenever this conversation seeps into the legislature, there's always going to have to be conversations and justifications of why we have to lower that number. If we're not starting at a significantly high number, that can still be reasonable, right? Like we can justify with good reason. And I keep in mind the numbers about the downturn on enrollment, specifically the impact on community colleges when it comes to that number at 23%, and just at large in higher education. But if we're not starting at a high point where we truly believe as a commission that higher education should be funded at, then I don't think anybody else will. Who would then be the person, the individual, the entity that will be pushing for the highest dollar possible, not to meet the expectations of what the revenue forecast will be for the legislature. That's their job. But for what we believe will be a reasonable, affordable, and accessible, and successful higher education program here in the state of Oregon. And I would love for our starting line to really show that to the legislature, let them come back to us and tell us why they cannot meet that goal. But we should be bold. Right now, we should be in a time, we live in a time where the pandemic has highlighted a lot of discrepancies, both in the money that our students hold in their pocket and the institutions. Today, we heard even from students how they would love to see that opportunity and promise grant be increased And they also talked about programming. They talked about the resources that they would like to see the universities establish or be able to reconfigure so that they're meeting student needs. All of that requires for us to really to advocate at the highest level possible. And so I'd love to see if there's appetite and a conversation for us to really consider increasing the funding recommendations, knowing that this is the starting point and knowing that the legislature will do its work to probably bring it down and try to find some other number that will meet their forecast. But I really think it's within our responsibility to shape a picture of how higher education should be funded, and what it will take to get to that level of funding that is consistent with our values and our goals, our 40-40-20 goals, and our student goals, the ones that they've testified about today and will continue to testify about in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner. The intent of what Ramona has presented is, I think we used the words both aspirational and credible. And so it does represent a sizable increase. Ben's introduction this morning and talking about being 40th in the support of students nationally is just totally unacceptable. This gets us much closer to where we need to be. The thing I would add to that is, within the context of being bold with how much we ask for, we also have to, we're making a statement, a policy level statement of where to engage those resources. And the clarity of this is the support of students. And so I think I want to make sure that we see what's being presented in front of us as a way that our commission clearly represents a policy position in putting forward a budget. So thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Other questions, other thoughts? I could see the wheels turning. Okay. All right, Ramona, I'm coming back to you. Thank you.
Next slide. Commissioner Rowe expressed this better than I could, so I'm not gonna try and this is our #1 priority, the Oregon Tribal Student Grant. It's one times money. It is a huge investment in equity for a group that has been underrepresented for a long time. And so this is continuation of the historic investment that was made in this last year. And I don't think there's a lot more to say about that, other than, it supports equity, affordability, student success, and support. And so, next slide. This, and I'm not going to do this for every single one of them, so you can relax there. I'm going to hit the really big ones at this point and go a little bit deeper. And the most of the conversation likely will actually be about the support fund decision. So I'm going to try and get there pretty quickly. This one deserves some attention, though. This is one of our largest packages. It is as the commissioners have just alluded to, is a huge investment in equity, in that it puts the resources into the hands of those with the greatest need. And so what this package is really about is it is taking our successful Oregon Opportunity Grant and our Oregon Promise grants and making them larger so that they actually meet what meet a greater degree of need that people have, and it is taking away some of the restrictions on the program so that it also increases access. More specifically, it takes those Oregon Opportunity Grant dollars, and again, we're talking about 4 times the amount of dollars that is currently in our budget, and it distributes them based on tiered awards. So those who have the greatest need get the greatest amount of money, up to and including tuition, books, supplies. But it also expands it on the other end as well, so that there are more awards that would be possible, so that we would be giving much smaller awards, but still awards to families with higher estimated family contributions, going up to $10,000. And currently, I think we're at about the $8,000 level. So that just kind of tells you there's growth occurring in the amount of the awards for those most in needs, and then in the number of awards still for those families who may, even though the system says they can come up with $10,000, may not be able to come up with $10,000. So the other things that are happening there is there are some funds specifically targeted to students who are near completion to incentivize them to get across that finish line. And there are some changes happening, particularly in the Oregon Promise, that are pretty big scale changes. One is it removes the requirement that you would have to use that award at a community college, and it would make it eligible for use at any post-secondary institution, including 4-year colleges and universities. It removes the GPA requirement, which also has a positive equity impact, and it removes the accelerated learning discounts that are available in the program. So by making it a more universal grant, it has the potential to have a much bigger impact, both for individuals and also for the population. Next. I'm not going to talk about these again. I'm just going to, these are the other financial aid programs. And we will make this available to you if you want to read more details about the specific ones. Next. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I already gave the definition of them. These are the institutional policy option packages. We have the big student equity one, which will be formed more as we move forward with the legislative task on underrepresented student success. The rest of these, cybersecurity is actually a new program. Open educational resources are continuations of things that are already being funded, although a little bit differently. And then next, these are just the specific public university state programs that are included in that in this particular policy option package, and it's providing, again, operational supports for some of these things that are happening on more of a project basis. Next. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what the decision-making process was for making the recommendation on our public university and community college support fund amounts were. As you'll recall from the last meeting, Jim Pinkard walked you through a number of possible options and ways to think about the level of funding that could be provided for public university and community college support funds. And it was I think they call it a spirited conversation. And so I wanted, this one is not as inclusive of all of those ideas, but it really is telling you kind of how we get to where we landed in terms of what the recommendation we're making to you today is. And I wish Jim could be here. He is being rerouted all over the country on an airplane right now. So not only do I wish he could be here, I bet he wishes he could be here. So when you look at Public University Support Fund, we start out at a level that's $900 million. And the idea is that this is, again, providing the level of operational support to continue ongoing services. It doesn't add new outcomes, new programs, new people served, any of that. It's just the money to be able to do what it is you're doing now. CSL is the state calculation. It does not include everything that needs to be included when you're looking at institutional costs. We do a second calculation, and that's when you get to what we call a base funding level. Then we also have we have conversations as we're trying to figure out what level that is the right level to fund support funds at, and we take that information from the universities, from the community colleges, and we have them tell us what it is they think they need in order to continue operations. The recommendation for HECC, I believe, the original request from public universities was $978 million. That would allow most universities to keep tuition at or below 5%. It would preserve affordability and student support investments and maintain progress towards statewide goals. Obviously, if you give more, you can do more. I think that the HECC recommendation actually takes in some subsequent conversations that occurred about some things that had not been included in that request. And so the number we landed at is actually higher than the original request. It is a 10.3% increase to that $900 million figure, taking us to $992 million. This meets the identified operational needs, but it does not provide dedicated resources for either providing equity services or doing new things. It is honoring sort of the historical meaning of the support fund, which is continuing the status quo to some extent. The new things and the innovative things are obviously equally as important to us as they are to public universities, but those come in through the policy option packages we've already talked about. So any questions about public university support fund? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to community college support fund. Next. So this one is a little more complicated. And so if you'll recall the conversation from last time, the current budget level for community colleges this biennium is $699 million. And CSL would have increased that by 9.3% or $65.1 million. And the original request, however, came in quite a bit higher than that because it included from the community colleges use of fund reserves, one-time federal money that had been used to maintain services, and so we talked about, this is really one of the ones where it comes in about, we want to ask for what the community colleges need, but we also don't want to shoot the moon at such a level where we're not taken seriously in that conversation. We want to have a credible level of recommendation that that allows people to continue to do services at the same level, but does recognize that we may have to do some things differently moving forward than how we've done them in the past. So basically, this our assumptions as we move forward here and in the HECC recommendation is that we would fully fund and recommend fully funding the operational increases. And that includes things like things that were in collective bargaining agreements, increased costs through service and supplies, personnel, things like that. But the decision was to not include the use of one-time federal money in that recommendation, and also to not backfill the one-time use of fund balances. That is not to say that that we did not recognize that these are unusual circumstances and that those fund balances and federal monies were used to sustain that system. It's just they're not going to be available on an ongoing basis. So how do we come up with a recommendation that allows us to capture the cost drivers, but also try and figure out a transition from how we get where we're at now to where it is we need to be in order to maintain the system. This was all, as you recall, in the face of a 44% increase in requested funding, but enrollment declines of over 20%. That's what made this ask hard to do, is because the requested funding was at a much higher level than first of all, we expected them to be able to fund, and then also not kind of taking into account changing circumstances. And so this recommendation is a kind of a compromise recommendation. And it came from conversations with a lot of people and who all put their ideas on the table. And what it looks at is completely funding the ongoing cost drivers, which are higher than the public university cost drivers, and also, but not funding the one-time federal money or the use of reserve funds, but recognizing that there were community colleges needed time to get to a place where they could transition and adjust to the enrollment trends, and also to changing employer expectations. There's an addition of a one-time amount to this of $50 million to try and aid that transition. And so what you'll see in the final recommendation is a request of $155 million, or a 20% increase to the Community College Support Fund on an ongoing basis. But then that $50 million one-time payment, which would not be distributed through the Community College Support Formula, but instead would be a one-time payment occurring at the beginning of the biennium, that takes the increase in this particular policy option package to 29.5% total. So you move from, the CSL or state calculation of a 9.3% recommendation to the request of a 44% increase. And this kind of gets you halfway to some extent. So you're getting a 20% increase to the ongoing and almost a 30% increase overall for this biennium. And I think a lot of the people in this room were involved in these conversations. And so I'm assuming that other people have have comments or questions based on where we landed and why.
I would just add that in those conversations that we felt that it was important to smooth out the bump. This part of what has happened with the pandemic is such abrupt changes that and we're not through this point, so we don't know just what the implications are ongoing. And that you have to balance, as I think our first testimony this morning was about not losing the capacity to meet the needs of students. And at the same time, having to make institutional adjustments to changing environment, changing context. As a statewide entity, with the mission that we have, moving out the bump, allowing institutions to make judgments and decisions that may be very difficult in the long run, but to do that in a much more planful way than just having to do an immediate reaction to a very threatening circumstance. That was the reasoning behind this compromise that was just described. I think I described it.
I think I have a question that I should ask before, or maybe I just don't. And that is, to what extent does enrollment, potential further enrollment declines? Is it factored into this budget, and what's the implication for enrollment swings either one way or another on the requested budget?
Right now, I believe the resources that we've consulted look like it is not a one-time occurrence of enrollment changes. The enrollment declines started pre-pandemic, and they're expected to last after the pandemic, although at a much more gradual rate. The number that I'm remembering in Jim's materials was close to between 3% and 4% over time. Now, also, we know from past experience that you're really looking at human behavior here, and it has the potential to change. And so, there in previous recessions, we know the enrollment has gone up dramatically, and so that's definitely a possibility. It just at this point doesn't appear to be the trend, and so we're not trying to have a cliff that they fall off. We're trying to just be consistent with how we've come up with these numbers in the past. And if we had kind of come up with this strategy earlier, this would be structured a little bit differently. We would probably have the 20% increase in support funds as part of the support fund, and we would have done a different policy option package that added a one-time payment of $50 million. This is a little bit awkward here because it's going to be confusing and people are not going to remember, the details of it. But we were already at a point where logistically we had entered these numbers into the system. And that's part of how the budgeting process works with the state is we have certain deadlines where positions have to be entered in, dollars have to be entered in. With this one, we had already passed the deadline of being able to add a policy option package. And so it looks a little messier than it would otherwise. So I think right now we anticipate the enrollment trend is kind of on a gradual decline. And that's not the HECC, that is, education and education experts across the board. And we also, I mean, I want to also point out that the use of the federal money, they used it the way they were trying to use it, which was to keep doing the same thing they had been doing and not make major changes. And then also the use of fund balances, that was used predominantly to make tuition reimbursement after the pandemic hit. And so we do think that some of these costs are likely one-time costs, and so they're not going to be a pattern that gets repeated. And so that's part of the logic behind this proposal as well, is let's try and give the increase to the level that the costs are going to continue to grow at, but also the federal replacement of federal money, use of fund balances, those are also very much local decisions. And so you have to make a decision, state, is that how you want to use state resources, is to compensate for that. Also given it may not be something that's going to repeat itself. And so, like I said, this is, it's not a perfect solution, but we were trying to create that bridge funding that didn't leave anyone in the lurch and gave people time and resources to plan over the course of the biennium.
Just suggest a couple of additional things for the commissioners to think about as we look particularly at these support fund recommendations. One is that they do not include the policy option package that can be $1 million back. Our intent and expectation for those dollars is that they will be distributed to community colleges and public universities and will support endeavors that those universities plan and propose and submit to us to better support their underrepresented students. So they will, they would, if they were adopted by the legislature in the form that they're recommending, they would supplement the community college support fund and public university support fund and provide additional state resources to our public institutions to make gains, to actually not just keep sort of maintain roughly a status quo, but actually make gains against the particularly the equity targets that they and we have set. The other thing I'd say, and it relates directly to the enrollment question in some ways, is I think it's yet to be seen or it's perhaps not yet knowable, what a new investment in financial aid, direct grant aid to students like the one that we proposed here would mean for college and university. At its best, at our most optimistic, if the state were really to follow through with a fourfold increase in state direct support to students, we would expect to see, I think, recently some enrollment increase that would help to support and shore up or sustain institutional budgets alongside this continued funding or growing funding from the state institutions. So, again, these recommendations were designed, these support fund recommendations were developed in connection with a larger budget approach, and you sort of alluded to this, Chair, in your recent comments, a larger budget, and Vice Chair Rowe, in a larger budget approach that really emphasizes the values of the Commission around investments in financial aid, and suggests that that may be a strategy for growing enrollment, and therefore, helping support the institution.
Thank you.
I just ask a general question? I'm not sure. So do we have an idea how many students are eligible?
Actually, turn that over to Juan. You want to join me? Juan's our director of Oregon Student Access and Completion.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chair, Chair, for the record, my name is Juan Baez, and I'm the director of the Office of Student Acquisition. Otherwise, I'm better known as OSAC throughout the great state of Oregon. We do have always an idea of the range of students who are eligible and those that we awarded. So I'll give you an example that sometimes we award, good 70, 80,000 students but only a fraction of those, maybe 46% or 50%, will pick up the award. And for us, and that terminology means that they enroll in the colleges and universities. Currently, the pickup rate, the average is about 46%. With an increase in award amounts, you would expect that will rise. And it's not just those who have the pattern of completing, say, the FAFSA, which is the basic application, or the ORSA, that gives them access to the Oregon Opportunity Grant, but that more of them will apply because the dollars are becoming real in terms of the affordability, the net cost to the students, so that affordability becomes a true opportunity to be in school, not just get access, to stay in school, be successful. So that is something that we're going to be expecting to see in the numbers. The current FAFSA filing in our state and across the country, this is where a lot of the experts are talking about enrollment is down, is projected to be down. This is because we're seeing nationwide that the FAFSA filing is down compared to prior years and certainly prior to the pandemic. Still the trend today that is down from last year or from previous years. When will that change? We're on the lookout for that pretty much each and every single week at HECC. So our staff monitor that. We have access to a federal system, and it's fairly automated. The old FAMS that we were talking about replacing, the old financial aid management information system. And we can see the filing rates. We can see who's filing. We can see a great deal of data on those students. When that starts to trickle up or differentiate, then we're going to be able to flag that. And that is very important for us because in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, there was a very abrupt shift, very sudden shift in the filing rates. And it wasn't caught quickly. And what it would mean is a greater demand for dollars and a very immediate demand for dollars. We want to be monitoring that. So in the future, I hope that we have opportunities to present to you where those numbers at, the patterns, the number of students that we were awarding the Oregon Opportunity Grant this year. We continue to make awards. So we are going to be making an award for students who filed as of the end of July. So every couple of weeks, staff will bring forward to me a request for authorization to make additional awards, and we will do that throughout the academic year. We continue to project that we have dollars available to award. And so we haven't stopped awarding, which is a good thing, because some students are going to be starting late. That's another factor, a change in policy that we made, and commissioners will remember that. In the past, we had a very tight filing deadline, so there wasn't enough money to supply all the demand. And so we are expecting to continue to award this year, but also not require full enrollment at the FAFSA facility. Return that late. Hope that answers your question, and be glad to respond to the others.
Well, and I assume when you talk about the 46% of these in pickup, that you factor that into our making and assume
That is correct, Mr. Chair. We look at the very large global number of those eligible, and then we project how many of them will pick up the award and the extent that they will pick up the award. Our staff spend many, many hours calculating this and projecting it, and fine-tuning it, every single time, because it's a projection of human behavior. A couple of the variants that you've probably heard of us talk about include not just how many show up, but their level of enrollment. Because if they enroll full-time, it's a full award. If they enroll part-time, it's part-time. So that's another factor we need to consider.
and the fact that you don't leave money on the table.
Yeah, I just say credit to HECC staff wanted to got far more effective, successful, I think, at making these projections, but just better use of data. I think that'll be further increase information systems. But it's a big project. But one did note the great shock of 2008. That even with more sophistication and better systems, I think folks in no state were prepared for that. So that's always on our mind as we look to the future and try to forecast. We don't know what a full-blown recession. I mean,
Yes, Commissioner.
Think you got it. And maybe this isn't the question for right now. I was wondering about if you had data of student completion rates of student to access to did enroll with the using the learning the other grants.
Yes, Commissioner. We have a couple of reports and through our research office that the Oregon Opportunity Grant and then there will be Oregon Promise, and those reports indicate the completion rates, the success rate of those students, and it's completion and retention. That's very important. We can follow up with some links to those reports.
and the short story. The short story is that they had a positive impact on completion and surprisingly in good ways, right? Even compared to other sources. For the numbers in past ones.
That's it. That would be.
Sure, this, if I may, just talk to Mr. Plum, and Oregon Promise is a wonderful title. I love it. And, you know, this is my home state and I am, it's a wonderful place to be. And when I hear that term, I want that to be available, not meaning remove ages. Any student who wishes to study, I mean, this is my dream for the future, right? To study at U of O, Oregon State, OIT, Classic Community College, wherever. You know, my dream, one of my dreams is to see students of all ages supported in our higher ed programs. I'm thankful that you folks are operating and running and doing the work. We're going to do this, you know, 10, 20 years ago. Now, I just wanted to say my bit because I think this, you know, you folks are heading in the right direction. That's what I get. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate that. On behalf of the staff and team and tech staff who worked on this, and many partners, including colleges, universities, the Student Association, and the work that you see reflected in the proposal and popping onto really it pushes further in that direction and to hit the targets, the affordability targets for all Oregon. Thank you.
I just have a couple more things that I haven't touched on yet that I just want to make sure that you've got an opportunity to hear about because you are going to be asked here in a few minutes to approve the submission of this budget or explain what it is you'd like for us to change or modify if that's the decision. So the next couple of slides again were discussed in length last time. I'm not going to repeat those, but basically I want to move to the next slide after this one and just reacquaint you with the list of prioritized public university capital projects. And so you can see I mentioned earlier, this is the one where we use the rubric to basically score them and based on the criteria that the commission has provided in the past. And I just wanted to make sure you got to look at again what this list of projects actually is. our highest priority every time we submit this policy option package is number one in the list is almost always capital, basically capital improvement and renewal deferred maintenance. I mean, that's one of the values of this rubric, and so that drives it. After that, you know, I'm not going to read it to you, but you can at least see the projects and where they're located across the state. And many of these projects, you know, also may be projects that have been submitted multiple times, and the proposals keep getting better and they move up and down on the list. So next slide. This is the continuation of that list. You can see that we're looking at, for public universities, a combination of Q bond requests and G bond requests in this particular list. It also shows just the institutional matching funds that go into this for the various projects as well. Next slide. This particular slide is showing a different type of bond, and these are self-funded university projects. So the institutions themselves actually pay the debt service on this one, and they go into our budget to make the request for bonds, but it really doesn't have an impact on state funds. Next slide. Community college projects have a different rubric. They focus on improvement and replacement, technical skills development. They also engage institutional matching and contribute toward the elimination of deferred maintenance. Next slide. Here are the list of community college projects. The G bonds here are limited to $8 million total. So that's just by virtue of the type of bond this is and the decisions that have been made in previous biennia. Next slide. The rest of these are just the career development and support packages. Again, I've already talked about those, and the next slide are the operational ones, which I think I've already spoken to. So at this point, that is an overview of the budget, where we've been and where we're hoping to go. And after a year's worth of effort and a 1,200-page document, it's up to you guys now, what you want us to do.
My fellow commissioners for the dialogue and comments, or questions, worries, concerns that you have. Do you think they got it right? Part of my,
do you think we heard you?
Yes.
No, I think that's a good place to be at this point.
And as chair, part of my job is to try to read the room and see where we are as a group. And this, Ramon, as you were presenting, I know for many people it was a summation of things that we've heard over the last several months. And so a statement of many, summarizing many conversations along the way. And my sense of what I hear in the room is support for the direction, for the proposals that being made. I do want to clearly acknowledge our Commissioner Lujan Valeria's desire that we would be asking for more money for the institutions. I want to just get on the record that I heard him clearly and you know, appreciate his position and bringing that to thank you for that, and to know that we are at a particular step in the budget process, and there's room in the future for advocacy. We don't know what the, for example, what the economic pictures looks like. So this is our best shot at what we think is due at this moment. And my want to make sure that everybody had the chance to comment. Commissioner Adams, did you want to ask a question? I hope I didn't miss.
No, I will admit that this is a lot to take in, the first budget cycle that I'm a part of. So I really appreciate the time to read the materials. I did send a question to Director Cannon before about the psilocybin stuff, but I didn't have any questions about the budget. Just want you to know that I did read it, and I'm in learning phase here as a commissioner.
Thank you. Anyone else before we call for vote? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ramona, you spent some time talking about the difficulty of predicting human behavior, in particular on the topic of the enrollment declines in community colleges. So I guess my question is, what does the next checkpoint look like? When is that next checkpoint to see how things play out and how we might adjust the funding levels, whether the enrollment increases during a recession or whether it continues to decrease? But when is the next, when do we revisit the discussion?
So I would say that that's kind of a multi-part answer. I think that the HECC as an organization, as Juan referenced, continually monitors it. And so if there is data that looks like the trend is shifting, I do think that we would take note of that. Now, opportunity to actually act on that is different. Ordinarily, the state works in a 2-year budget cycle. The mechanism we have if the environmental conditions change is the emergency board. And that is our opportunity that if all of a sudden there were a spike in enrollment or something like that, we would have the opportunity to go and note that with the legislature and potentially change the amount of money that we were requesting to provide services. Those emergency boards occur on a quarterly basis. And so as we be kind of monitoring the situation, and we also would 100% hear immediately, I think, from the community colleges who also have their own conduits to the legislature. I suspect it would be something that we would, if it were a dramatic increase, we'd be looking to see if we needed to make adjustments.
Mr. Chair, there are no further questions. There's a motion to accept the agency as budget.
As Chair Rose moved, is there a second to her motion? Commissioner Hayman, second to the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Gratitude to staff.
Yes. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioners.
the last item.
Yes, two items.
Two items that are very important.
For the clarity of the record, I would note that I believe Commissioner Lou Hondelay is no longer on the call.
The last item is, there are two administrative rules. Consider a temporary amendment to the division of the private career school licensure requirements for facilitator training. The second adoption for chapters of 715, the collection of data from public institutions on students as parents and caregivers. So let's take it's Kia. Hi.
It's Kaya. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kaya Sorensen. I'm the Interim Deputy Director for Private Post-Secondary Education at the HECC. With me today are Matthew Altman and Pete Gertenrich, who are both specialists from the private post-secondary side of the HECC, and who, along with Kyle Thomas, I'd like to thank for their significant contributions to the proposed temporary rule changes that I'll talk to you about today for your approval. Ballot Measure 109 was passed in November of 2020. It directs the Oregon Health Authority to license and regulate the manufacturing, transportation, delivery, sale, and purchase of psilocybin products and the provision of psilocybin services. This measure allows psilocybin to be used to treat mental health conditions in licensed service centers with people who are 21 years of age. The Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Psilocybin Services, is held responsible for regulating the psilocybin industry and will oversee the new programs. This is all relevant to the HECC because on May of 2022, OHA published Rules 333, 333, 3005 to 3090, detailing the requirements for psilocybin facilitator training programs, which includes the requirement of 160 hours of instruction and practicum for individuals seeking licensure as psilocybin facilitators. These hours standards subject businesses offering the training to oversight by HECC as private career schools. Through reviewing rules and through engagement with the psilocybin field and with OHA, staff identified two licensure impediments. The first, some potential schools reported difficulty in obtaining general liability insurance as required by the HECC because it's a new industry that involves the use of psilocybin. Second, also because this is a new field and is novel in the US, HECC's definition of qualified instructor also serves as an impediment to licensing schools. I'll first talk about our proposed solution to the comprehensive general liability insurance issue. Under current rule OAR 715-045-0032, comprehensive general liability insurance is required. If a PCS school cannot obtain liability insurance, the school is at risk to a potential lawsuit, and as a result, it could impact their ability to remain financially solvent and to remain open. If the school closes, this could harm schools and students. Our proposed solution was the following draft language. If there is sufficient evidence that a group of career schools cannot obtain insurance, they must first, in 715-045-0032, provide a clear, legible written notice in no less than 12-point font to potential students before they sign an enrollment agreement with the college that the school has no comprehensive liability insurance and may have difficulties reimbursing students' tuition costs in the case where the school becomes financially insolvent. The notice has to be signed by the student to acknowledge that they received it. The second mechanism of protection is language added in 715-045-0029, our rules around tuition protection fund. We added language that generally says that PCS schools who cannot obtain liability insurance will be required to pay a slightly greater initial capitalization deposit and pay slightly higher amounts into our biannual payments of the tuition protection fund. This way, if a school closes, students will be able to benefit from that tuition protection fund. And with respect to teacher qualification requirements, our rules list a number of requirements for teachers in OAR 715-045-0012, such as age, a minimum of a high school diploma, 2 years of experience in the field, and these are all difficult for a new and novel field to obtain. Fortunately, OHA's rules, OAR 333, 333, 3030, outlines standards and verification that better accommodate an emerging field. They state specifically that in order for curriculum to be approved, a training program must demonstrate that each instructor and person who trains instructors at a novel program has sufficient experience, knowledge, skills, and ability to competently train students in their assigned subject matter. This can be demonstrated through education, certification, professional experience, personal narratives, and references. And instructors must also understand the objectives of the training program, be able to communicate effectively with students, and demonstrate skill in instruction and student supervision. So In lieu of meeting the requirements that we have in our HECC rule, we are pointing instead to the OHA rules for instructor qualification. And so we state registration as a teacher of an Oregon Health Authority approved psilocybin facilitator training program must submit proof that the instructor is identified with a program approved by the authority and the instructor's qualifications have been submitted to the authority under OAR 333, 333, 3020 through and 3030. As we worked on these rules, we convened members of the psilocybin field and we convened the PCS advisory committee asking for feedback on these proposed changes. In general, the feedback that we received from the psilocybin field were questions about whether or not there was an option for payment plans or for different fees for nonprofit institutions or smaller institutions. And then from the PCS advisory committee, we heard a general concern that possibly too many concessions were being made to the psilocybin field, and a concern that there's a risk to the TPF fund if a number of psilocybin schools don't have general liability insurance and close, that could potentially draw down that TPF fund, which could impact all of the schools. In response to this feedback, these are temporary rules, and we plan to, as we move forward, have more partner engagement sessions so we can better understand these concerns and the best way to potentially address them as we move forward with our more permanent rules. And with that, I will stop for questions.
Kaya, do I understand that the legislative package that Kyle spoke with us this morning, some of that was intended to deal with some of these issues? Is that correct?
I'll let Kyle answer that.
Kyle's hand is up, so go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Cross. The legislative package is intended to deal only with the issue of lack of immunity granted to HECC and the fact that immunity was granted to 3 other sister state agencies. I think generally with regards to the other issues that Kaya is bringing forward, as the sector matures, we think it's entirely possible that some schools will show evidence of being able to obtain general liability insurance. Likewise, as more individuals gain practical experience facilitating psilocybin therapy sessions, more of them would become eligible under the current and sort of non-specialized version of the qualified instructor rule. And so we can revisit at a later date, probably a significantly later date, a matter of several years from now, whether or not it continues to be appropriate to point to OHA's rules on qualified instructor, or in fact come up with a sort of more permanent strategy. I think I should say too that throughout this process, the question of equity has come up. The question of individuals that do have practical experience with psilocybin, but that experience has existed outside of the bounds of legality here in the state of Oregon and in the United States. And so I think any sort of permanent structures need to be built in light of that particular issue and in conversation with individuals and communities that have that experience.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready for a motion. Is there a motion to approve the temporary rule? Move for approval. And I'll second. Seconded by Commissioner Rojas. And any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Carries. Thank you all. And one more item. Temporary rule regard to data collection on parents, students, parents and neighbors. So businesses.
Hello, members of the board and Chair Cross. My name is Shonda Alawapo, and I serve as Senior Policy Analyst in the Office. I'm here today to ask you to approve the temporary rule 715-015-0010, collection and reporting of data on student parents. During the legislative session of 2021, Senate Bill 564 was adopted, requiring HECC to collaboratively design questions to allow each student in our public universities and community colleges to identify that if they are parents, persons acting as a parent or legal guardian. The legislation requires, one, that the commission establish a format and timeframe for the collection of the data, and two, that each public post-secondary institution of education make the data available on an annual basis to HECC. The rule includes 2 questions to be asked of students annually and the requirement to submit the data to, and also annually to HECC. HECC will use this data to measure equity and access and outcomes among student parents. And this interesting this morning in the testimony of some important student body to make visible. We partnered with national and state experts on identifying and serving post-secondary student parents, and with data and DEI experts at our institutions drafted and went through 2 rounds of revisions for the 2 questions included in the temporary. Due to the timing of when the data is to be collected, it's legislated to start to do it in the 2022-2023 academic year. We're asking you to adopt the rule today while we go through the process required for you to.
Thank you. Any questions about all the great things you're doing? Then very much to
We adopt temporary rule.
it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now, with that, I think we have reached the end of our agenda, and any objections, I would bring the meeting to a close before I do end.
Yeah, just to note, we, I think, have asked commissioners for a meeting Wednesday and Thursday, second. That's probably hold it. In some years, we've held that as a off-site meeting, not Salem, sort of overnight 2-day meeting. I think the current plan is by to hold the commission meeting on Wednesday afternoon and Thursday morning in Salem, some sort of social opportunity for Wednesday evening, and at least some way to accommodate your Salem folks who are traveling from outside. So that's the current thinking. We'll finalize this go too soon, but do continue to plan on at least the Wednesday afternoon and Thursday that week. So for next possible at Mesa.
And we do not meet in Salem.
We do not meet in Salem.
All right, with that, that's adjourned.
Yes. Because you want to